Hey pole dancer, welcome to the Evidence-Based Pole Podcast. My name is Rosy Boa. I'm a pole dancer, pole teacher, and personal trainer. And I've started this podcast so that we can learn together, talk with the experts, read the research, and feel better on and off the pole. So if that sounds like something you're interested in doing, let's go. Welcome to an episode that I'm very excited about. This is one that when I was starting the podcast and I was brainstorming dream guests, Emily was definitely one of them. Also, y'all who are my students may have seen this on my bookshelf when I teach, or also I've referenced it in class sometimes. Her book, Applied Anatomy of Aerial Arts. Reference it all the time. I did some workshops with Emily when I was in Seattle. Hey. Twins. And I reference those notes all the time. So Emily is a huge resource to the community. I would say you're probably a little bit more focused on circus than pole, but a lot of what you talk about is very relevant to pole dancers as well. And certainly has been very instrumental in my teaching and my understanding of anatomy and, inversion, shoulder stuff, all that stuff that we have in common is the word I was looking for. And also, you're a researcher in addition to, being an educator and a clinician. So I'd like for you to just talk about yourself a little bit and some of the things that you do, just to kick it off. And, for people who haven't heard of you, you may know of you as the circus doc, perhaps. Talk a little bit about what your whole deal is, and then we'll dive in a little more depth.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for having me on. Let me talk a little bit about my background and how I got here, because I think that makes things make more sense. I myself was a circus artist professionally for a couple of years prior to going back to school, which is why things do tend to be more focused on circus than pole. It's because I basically have done more of it with my body, but I love my pole dancers. Pole dancers are awesome. And you guys are just killing it. So, yes, love pole. As you said, I am a clinician, so I have a practice based in Seattle, Washington, where I see circus artists, and I have other circus medicine practitioners that work with me, and we just have a practice full of awesome humans doing awesome things with their bodies. I am also an educator, so I wrote that Applied Anatomy of Aerial Arts book, and I teach online courses because I teach with American circus educators because I really think getting knowledge about how the body works out into the world of the people that are actually doing it with their bodies is just so amazing and important. And so I've been doing that for I think I first taught a continuing education course for instructors in 2011, 2012. So I cannot believe it, but it's been well over a decade. And then I also teach continuing education for clinicians because I want our circus-bodied athletes of all types, shapes, sizes, colors, stuff, things, all the stuff to be able to get the care that they need. And that's responsible care that has an understanding for our sport and our athletic needs of our bodies. And then because I'm a nerd, like most of you guys, yay nerds, I do research for fun. So I do partner with folks who work generally in universities and get IRBs. One of them is another clinician in my practice here with me. She's also a professor at a physical therapy school here in Seattle, and we partner on a bunch of research as well. So I do a little bit of everything. I've got my fingers into all the aspects of everything circus bodies, pole bodies, and I'm really excited to talk about some of them and share that excitement, knowledge, and nerdiness with you today.
Yeah, me as well. To have it shared with me and everyone listening. So let's start with research, because I think that's the, they're all big cans of worms, but I feel like that's one that's particularly relevant to the podcast and also folks. So I know you've worked on, a lot of different studies and longitudinal studies and stuff like that. But I think probably what would be most helpful for folks who are just coming into this is, to get a little bit of an introduction to the lens that circus arts tends to be researched through. Because certainly in my own reading and trying to keep up with the literature, many times it is from an injury standpoint, and that sort of, I'm not saying that people are saying that circus is a problem and pathologizing circus, but that is the lens through which a lot of the research is done. And then also maybe talk a little bit about normative studies and like what is normal, quote, healthy, quote, and then any other sort of general lenses or ways of thinking about researching circus that you think are particularly relevant.
So researching circus is, from the biomechanical musculoskeletal side of things, really stinking new, which I'm sure you know. However, from the cultural aspect of like circus research or from the sociological side of circus research, it's actually a much older field. So there's actually a huge amount of research that has gone into what is circus, what is the theater of circus. All of that is actually quite a bit older, which is really interesting. And then from the musculoskeletal side, we're really trying to build that base, or have been over the last few years, just trying to understand what the heck we should be studying, right? So that's where a lot of the injury data that you're seeing is coming from is, well, before we dive deep into, like, well, for example, pull, right? Everyone always is like, oh, my shoulders hurt, or I strained my hamstring. Or before we dive into that, is that actually what we're seeing? Let's figure that out first before we dive deep into X, Y, or Z, which is why you see a lot of the injury stuff. And that's because mainly our field is really quite new. There is a little bit going on the psychological side. There's a little bit going on the nutrition side. As recreational circus, as recreational pole has grown exponentially. I mean, just in the last decade, right? Like, mind blowing. I think, I was looking around the internet, just like as the internet has made these things normal in that people can find them in their communities. I think that the internet really has done that. It's just grown so fast. So it's funny. I'm realizing as I'm saying these words how old I'm going to sound. So I'm just going to say it. But I remember the start of the internet, right? Like, and when we think about, like, I think about a phone. I don't think I had a cell phone really until grad school. I didn't have a smartphone until I realized I was like missing friends' plans after I was like a practicing PT for a couple of years, right? And now we have these computers where we watch things constantly. And as that has grown, we've just grown exponentially. And so it really has happened in the last decade. And a lot of us have come to circus and pole arts as adults. And so we're starting to catch people as they're starting to go through grad school and they're starting to come out of grad school, when they're in that prime research time when we can get a master's thesis or a doctoral thesis or an honors papers or things like that, where you can start kind of pushing other fields to do research on the things that we love. And that's why we're kind of seeing this boom, like ever since like 2019, especially with the pandemic, as papers started to get published. It used to be the only place really having funding and interest in the research would have been Cirque du Soleil, where their dollars are on the line. We need to keep these performers performing. And now it's not necessarily about the dollars. We may get a little bit more of like but this is interesting type research, because we have people, the actual practitioners, that are interested in doing the research. So I'm seeing a lot more very broad lenses, as you said, of research and avenues. My personal research has jumped a little bit all over the place, because I'm also, so if you don't know about research, especially when you're researching humans, you need to get approval from a review board. And that process is really gatekept. There's a lot of financial barriers in the process of research. Some of it is very warranted. We want to make sure our subjects are safe and all of that. But it costs thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to do research on humans, because of this review board process. So you can't just be like, oh, I want to study this and study it. So because of that, me as primarily a clinician, not affiliated directly with the university, though I do work with a bunch of them, but not affiliated directly, I am kind of somewhat at the whims of the people I work with. So right now I'm in the process of writing up a study on pelvic floor dysfunction based on a survey we did last year. Yeah, that's right. And we presented it at a conference already, but we're actually getting to the nitty-gritty and writing the paper up. And then I'm doing a study also on this is like secret, nobody knows about it yet, but we're in the process of developing a protocol for a shoulder return to sport, some return to sport testing, some normalized values for some of us. So things are kind of a little bit all over the place. Some of it's like what my friends and colleagues want to research. Some of it's what I want to look at. Normative values in our population are few and far between. We're getting more and more of them. It's one of the things you're asking about to come back around. There is a study on the shoulders of acrobats versus aerialists, or those that do both, that has some normative data on the shoulder that's been published. And that was somebody's clinical doctorate thesis. So that's the Huberman study from 2019, maybe?
Sounds right.
Sounds right. Somewhere right in there. But that's Carly Huberman's work from when she was doing her doctoral research. And then we have some other normative values from conference presentations. And then I think you've already interviewed Stephanie Greenspan. If not, go back and check out that episode if you haven't listened to it yet. But her study, which was at many sites across the US, which I was thrilled to be one of the clinicians on for her, we did an intake of all of those folks, and she's going to start publishing those normative values starting really soon. So that paper, I believe, has already been written. So hopefully coming out in the next couple months here. The process to get into a journal and get it reviewed and getting all the way through is also, it takes a while to get from inception to actual publication. So that's a very long answer to lenses. The reason you see a lot of injury data is because that's where you kind of need to find where the problems are usually before you want to go diving down the holes, because there's, again, that more interest kind of coming up. We're seeing things on nutrition now, on psychology, on a little bit more the cultural qualitative studies of what does actually pole's a big one. What is the community aspect of pole? How does pole feed my soul, feed my community, help me stay engaged with moving my body? There's actually been quite a bit on that. There's at least 2 or 3 studies I can think of. So we're getting there. We're getting a larger field of researchers, and we're getting a larger breadth and depth of knowledge as well, which is fun.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's also something that you brought up in there that I think is really relevant for the differences in what we're seeing between folks who are looking at circus broadly defined and just pole. And of course, some of the circus broadly defined include pole dance in the way that I would think of it, but also things like Chinese pole that are similar. And that is, I mean, to be frank, research is not free, as you have mentioned. I don't know of any like big NSF grants that are like, we have to protect our strategic resource of circus artists.
In fact, there is no checkbox for circus. I mean, you're doing even performing arts grants. There's no, it's other.
Oh, for those of you outside the US.
Or dance teams, dance, or theater. And that is true. Who was I just talking to? I was just talking to folks from New Zealand. They don't have a checkbox for circus either. I was talking to them earlier this week.
Yeah, it's still kind of a niche thing. So there's not a lot of government funding for it, unless it's like kind of through another avenue. Like obviously in circus you have, Cirque du Soleil, they make money and spend money and want to keep their athletes happy, but can you imagine like those bastion of labor rights, strip clubs, funding research to promote the longevity of their independent contractors that they're chewing through and exploiting? I can't. Listen, I got some feelings about labor rights issues in stripping, but you don't have that same like centralized, institution organization that really has a vested ethic.
And this is also why men's sports, if you just think about sports, have so much more research on them than women's sports. It's just because there's money.
Yep.
It's more interesting. It's more involved. There's probably, I don't know this to be true, but I'm just thinking about it. I'm like, I bet you there's almost more information about like returning to like baseball than returning to working in a factory. Like I'm curious, like those are both going to be financial interests, but like which one's actually studied more, even though that'd be fun. I thought fun little review study to even do.
Yeah, I think it would be.
But it's true. It's like, it costs money to do the IRB. And then it's like, again, I do research for fun. I don't get paid to do research. I just like doing it. These are my hobbies. And so it's time consuming. It takes months, years, etc. Partially because a lot of us are doing it part-time. And yeah, but oh man, wouldn't that be great if we could get our workers to all of them?
Yes, that would be great. But I think as a result, like, I don't know that I've ever read, research outside of sort of like the feminism, gender studies, cultural studies sphere on strippers specifically. And like, specifically, if you are a stripper, what sort of body issues might you have? What sort of advice would be helpful for clinicians? And I just don't know of anything. And it may be out there. And if it is, please send it to me. I want to read it so badly.
I don't think I've seen it either.
Yeah.
And I really do wonder because it's not the same. Like being even a professional performer as a pole dancer in Cirque du Soleil or your competitive pole dancer is different than being a stripper. And it's like, but if we're just calling it the same thing, it's different when it's your day-to-day grind, it's your work.
Yeah. Versus
I perform, one night a week, or I'm teaching most of the time, or, so I'm sure there's something, but I certainly can't think of any injury studies off the top of my head, which is mostly what my brain is full of.
Oh, yeah, if anyone listening knows of more research, I would love to hear it. But I think that it does sort of highlight one of the struggles. So, the title of the podcast is the Evidence-Based Pole Podcast, and I had someone like reach out to me recently after an episode. I think it was the episode with Ginger, who was talking about work that she's currently working on, and she's like, well, the standards for evidence-based are double-blind, randomized controlled trials. And I was like, yes, I get that. The amount of evidence that we have is the amount of evidence that we have. The amount of research that we have is the total amount of research that we have. We are not baseball. We are not like dripping in studies, right? Like, I don't know of any motor learning studies on pole specifically, even though I would love to see that, right? I don't think I know of any motor learning studies on circus, maybe some stuff on tumbling. I think like where it overlaps with gymnastics, maybe a little bit there, but we make do with what we have, and do continue to work and build our body of knowledge. But
yeah, and I think because it's so new, people who are just coming to it don't realize how new it is. Like it's also just really new. There hasn't been a large enough group to successfully study until a couple of years ago in the grand scheme of things. So like you need numbers to be able to do something like a randomized controlled study. You need a lot of humans. And so to get enough humans in a controlled enough environment to do that probably wouldn't have even been a thing until recently. So we're getting there, guys. We're trying.
Yes. But I think it's helpful to have that perspective of like, what is there actually here? And it's a lot, right? Like it's certainly more than it is. There's been a lot more work done, but it's not, each paper is valuable. We are not.
Each paper is valuable. There's something, it is every paper, every researcher is pushing it forward one way or another. And the more time we have dedicated to it, the more we can duplicate that research, the more we know it's actually things versus. But the thing I want everyone to remember, I know this is an evidence-based poll podcast, but the thing I want you to actually remember is your daily science that you're doing with your body and your training is your most valuable resource. Like, just because it hasn't been confirmed with a study doesn't mean it's not true. 90% of the time, especially this phase of research that we're talking about with what we're doing right now, what we're trying to do is confirm what we see in the studio. Like, that's where we are. We're confirming what we see in the studio and seeing if it balances out to try to move things forward. So the research you're doing every day when you're training or every day when you're teaching is still research. And I urge you to not discount that and also document it for yourself, because you can learn so much from your daily training habits.
Absolutely. Keep a pole notebook. I'm a big fan of that.
Yes. Absolutely.
that comes to mind for me is nerve glides and like nerve mobilizations as part of flexibility training, which the last time I looked, I couldn't find anything on it specifically as part of flexibility training. There is work on it as like a rehabilitative, thing that you can do to help somebody recovering from injury or with sciatica or stuff like that. And it does seem to be effective for that. But in my own experience and like working with students, we're just doing like a little pre-test, post-test, doing 10 on each leg. Yeah, we can notice a difference. So if you have, evidence that you have gathered in the course of your teaching or, movement, don't necessarily discount it. If you are a teacher, maybe check in that it's working for everybody in, a different variety of bodies, because that's also certainly an important factor. But yeah. And I also...
Yeah, you're doing science on yourself, and you can do science with a group. But those are different groups, different ecosystems. Human bodies will probably be variable.
Yes. I think that a lot of folks who do not have or haven't spent a lot of time, particularly as an adult, sort of like learning about anatomy, are sort of under the impression that bodies are a lot more like each other than they necessarily are. So even things like, brain lateralization for language, yeah, there's a general trend, but like the right brain, left brain thing is generally a thing for most people, but it is not like that across the board, right? And I think that that's thing that people assume is just true of everybody. Or what is it, like the lat doesn't actually attach to the shoulder blade, and like what, 25% of people?
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, I'm like, so that's like my favorite one because it's so relevant to circus. I think it's in my book somewhere. But the latissimus dorsi, our big lats, muscularly in most people don't attach at all. Don't attach. It's through like a tendinous fascial attachment, and in it's something like 25-30% of people, there is no attachment at all. In the rest of them, it's usually a fascial attachment and not necessarily even a contractile tissue attachment. So it's like, yeah, does your lat attach there? It doesn't, right? Like that is highly relevant to how your shoulder might move or not move.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to vary in the population. So
it may vary in your class of 10 people, right? Like that's, yeah.
So I think that is a nice place to segue into, I'm trying to say this in a way where it makes sense to other people, not just in my brain. So when I, because my background's more in social science, so I'm used to thinking at a population level. But when you get into a clinical study, setting, everything is at an individual level, right? So if you read medical research, a lot of times you'll have like case studies that's like, this one person has this one thing going on, and you're like, oh, there's just one person, and then you look it up and it's like, this thing has been diagnosed in 10 people ever in the history of Western medicine. This is a large chunk of the total people who have this thing going on. So when we get into that more like individualized, really thinking about a specific patient, what are some of the things that you see where like, hey, this general advice that works for some people or most people doesn't work for, a range of people specifically, or general advice that might work for like the population as a whole that's just not applicable to people who are doing circus or pole?
Let's start kind of what we were just talking about, normative values. Because what does the word normative mean, right? It just means average. There's nothing about a body that is training, sadly, as an American, 3-4 times a week at end range with strength. Like that's not normal. Our normal is sedentary. Our normal is, is an average human of average size, height, whatever, not normal in our world. Our world is different. So one of the biggest things I have is the challenge of undoing some of that common wisdom, right? Did you know that being able to sit on the floor with your legs out in front of you straight, which means you have 90 degrees of hip flexion with your knee straight, is not normal? Right? Like that's not normal. So if you, unfortunately, sometimes it's not about the the patient. In this case, I'm talking about the clinicians, but there are some clinicians out there who will say, well, you already have enough mobility, so I don't know what to do with you. Or you already have enough mobility because you're sitting, that's too much, don't go there. It's like, well, no, I need to do my things that are safe and normal. And so it's knowing what normal is for that individual. So on the bigger population scale, like I think it's a understanding knowledge, empowering the artistic population to be like, okay, no, I need to seek care somewhere else, and educating the clinician population of what our norms are. And then on the individual, it's what's that individual's normal, right? So if I have a contortionist and she's like, well, I'm just not bending as well as I normally do, I may even still look at her, even as me, and be like, you're bending just fine, right? But if it's not normal for that person, it's not meeting their goals, that's where it's really interesting in the clinic, where we have to work together and problem solve and be like, okay, what is actually the limiting factor here for you? Is it, if it wasn't that contortionist, let's say somebody who's really rigid, is it bony shape? Is it how your muscles are firing around that joint? Is it the tissue itself that's sticky or stiff, and why? Is it because there's weakness and lack of control? And then I always personify the muscles. I'm like, now the muscles are scared because they're not in control. Nobody likes to feel out of control. I'm in a grip, right? And like, that's why you're not moving. Or is it like your bone is just like this and there's nowhere for it to go? I will say that is less common than your muscles are not feeling safe, secure, strong, and able enough to go into whatever range of motion you want to do. I don't know if I answered any of your questions, but other things. So you were asking cueing or things that don't apply to the population. Shoulders back and down. I mean, that doesn't really apply to anybody. What I find is shoulders back and down, knees not going over to, it's the same thing for everybody. It's this generalization and telephone that's been played with cues that aren't evil. They just got simplified so far beyond recognition that they're not necessarily helpful. So, like the cue shoulders back and down, right? That came from like, we don't want people coming around the world like this, right? Like sitting with their phones, doing like, so you should bring your shoulders back and down. It's like, yeah, but no one should actually be here. This is not where we want people either, right? So it's not saying you should actually bring your shoulders back and down. Shoulders are really complex ecosystems of themselves. They're basically bones and joints swimming in a sea of muscle, and we get a million different choices of where we can put them. And if you have any sort of neurodivergence or hypermobility, good luck finding where that middle swimmy section is. But shoulders basically should be swimming in kind of the middle. They should be swimming in that muscle and kind of sitting supported on all angles, but not one thing. So if you say to a mover who's an achiever, who can get that movement pattern done and learn it, and like, tick, I learned that skill, shoulders back and down, they will bring their shoulders back, down, right? But this is not where our shoulders are supposed to be, especially if we're trying to do crazy things like bring our arms up overhead. Then you end up with little T-Rex arms. So there's those things that especially have kind of gotten watered down in the fitness world, that I think are simplistic and don't apply to our population or really to the general population. And understanding where they come from helps you understand how to use that cue effectively, even if it's not the best one, coming up with your own version of it.
Yeah. I have two thoughts there. So one is that, as you mentioned specifically, hypermobile, neurodivergent folks, it is much easier to be like, I'm going to go to my end range and that's where I need to be, than it is to be like, I need to find a position in the middle of my range and then be stable there, right? It's,
I mean, it's true for everybody, but it's even harder if you have a lower sense of proprioception or ability to know where that piece of body is in space.
I'm trying to think of an example. It's much easier to like touch an object than it is to take your hand away from you exactly 8 inches, right? Like one of these things is just easier on a, controlling your body level. And then the other cue.
It is. Okay. Like this is much easier. Bang my shoulder into my ear is up, right? Versus, raise it. What? How much? Yeah.
Find a spot.
No. Find a spot. Find the greatest width across your front and back body.
The other cue that I take umbrage with and see constantly is setting up for a push-up with your hands right underneath your shoulders if you're going for a chest push-up. If you have broad shoulders and a narrow carrying angle, yes, that may feel good. But if you have narrow shoulders and a broad carrying angle, it is just not a very strong position and tends to be a little bit grumpy on the elbows. And I cannot tell you how many students I have worked with who I'm like just out a little bit right there, yes, and they're like, I can do it. I'm so much stronger. I was like, you were always this strong. You were given a bad positioning.
Right, because then it comes down to the individual level, right? It's not just, it's not what works for everybody. It's what works for the body in front of you. How are things set up to help them succeed? And that can even be length of torso and leg length, right? So when you're talking about like something that works for an instructor that may not work for the students, if an instructor is a newer instructor and mainly used to working with their own body, sometimes it's hard to be like, wait, your center of mass is in a different spot than me. Wider hips, narrower hips, broader shoulders, narrower shoulders, all of that will, fat distribution, length of leg, length of arm, it all matters.
Absolutely.
It absolutely all matters.
I actually have an episode on that. And I have abnormally short arms. So like for me, the opening my arms part of an invert, easy peasy, not a problem. But other things like say tucking under the bar in a trapeze, that nope, there's no room for me. It doesn't fit. So like pros and cons, right? But
there is an awesome aerial instructor here in Seattle named Lauren Keel who has a trapeze T-Rex t-shirt, which is...
I also got that one when she did the bonfire. Yeah. Yes, I think we have similarly very short arms. Yeah. And I, like, as a fitness instructor, I get it, right? Like, I'm working with a group of 20 people. Like, I don't have time to go around the room and be like, you here. But I mean, my stance has always been like, okay, this positioning is based on like this specific thing that we're looking for. And I would rather teach you what the thing is and how to figure it out on your own body than I would just tell you put here or there, even though it does take more class time. And for some people, they're going to be like, it's a waste of time. Just tell me where to put my stuff. And those people are not going to be my students, and that's okay.
And it's harder as an instructor. That's what I get to do all day long, right? Is make it individualized. But that's not necessarily what you always get to do, because there may or may not be time for that. But, that's why we have different jobs.
Absolutely. Specializations. So folks may have heard the word. What is it, and who should you talk to about it? Because I think I've actually... I think the last time we worked together in person, because I've since moved out of state, it was because I was like, something's not right with the shoulder, and I think this will eventually become an issue. And so I came in, and it hasn't been an issue since. I've been doing my homework. But how do you know, right? Like, I do it a lot, and also I'm an instructor and also think about this constantly. So for me, like, I have like a checklist that I do on my inside, but it's not necessarily going to be the same as somebody else's checklist. So how do you know that it's time to think about prehab for something specifically beyond just generalized conditioning that you need to do to support your body doing hard stuff?
Okay, I'm going to tell you my ideal perfect world. Everyone has access to sport-specific care. It is within their budget, and we're all happy elves skipping through the forest, or whatever you want to be. My perfect world is when you start a new activity, you get to go see a movement specialist. I think physical therapists are personally great. You get to see somebody who's going to understand that new activity that you're getting into, the demands of it and can help you understand what your conditioning goals should be. It doesn't mean you'd necessarily be establishing a long-term relationship with them. It's just hey, if you're going to start hanging from your arms, let's see what your range of motion is. Let's see where your strength is, and have a conversation about kind of what level you should be starting at and how you should condition. Right? And that might be something that many coaches might be somewhat comfortable doing on the smaller scale, but in my perfect world, yeah, I'd love to see everybody a week before. Yeah, I'd love to see, because everybody also plans in advance. I do not, so like whatever. But everyone plans in advance and everything's amazing. Everything runs smoothly in the world. It's great. Really taking a lot of license here. But yeah, like a month, 6 weeks before you start a new activity, I'm like, I want to do a thing. Ooh, tomorrow, there's a class tomorrow. I'm going to do the thing tomorrow. Whatever. But yeah, like we kind of have an assessment. We like get you set and you're going to be like in the best position ever. Start the thing. It's going to be awesome. That's not how real life works. In real life, I think there's a couple different things. If you're, because like that's what prehab, I don't love the word. I don't know what I want the word to be. But I don't love the word. And maybe by the end of the conversation, you and I can come up with something even better. But times that you wouldn't, so there's times to seek care when you're not hurting, or to seek knowledge, not even necessarily care, but maybe also care, but knowledge. If you're plateauing, right? If you're plateauing, you're not able to gain skills. You don't feel like you're increasing range of motion, your flexibility. Things just aren't going well. Maybe not badly. You're not losing things, but things are plateauing. That's a great time to seek care. You know, am I missing a component of something that should be going on here? That could be musculoskeletal, where physical therapy could be great. That could be nutrition. Maybe you need to get more protein, you know, or maybe it's like you need to plan snacks differently. Maybe it's a strength issue. Maybe it's a mobility issue. Maybe it's a mobility issue based on strength. Maybe it's finding even just a different instructor who says it differently. But like a plateau, not like a plateau where you're like, oh, I'm making gains and things are changing and eventually but like, you're like, things are just not changing. That's usually a good indication that something else should change. Maybe your training schedule, but something's time to look at things, and that may be a physical therapist. Another time is somebody just not feeling right. You're in your bodies every day. If something changes, it's better to see someone then. And that may or may not be pain. If we're talking pain that does not resolve in a week or two is another good time to see someone. Or, you know, big boom, big fall. Like, there are other reasons. But like, yeah, what do I... Because prehab implies that there's going to be a rehab. And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe that's why I don't like it.
There's no destiny of injury that is thrust upon everyone.
Yeah, and the other thing is we can't actually prevent injury, which I know doesn't sell what I just said very well. What we can do is make it less likely to happen. We can prepare our bodies better for the random stuff life throws at us, whether that's a slippery floor or, you know, if we are training our bodies in a well-rounded way, it's going to be more resilient and more robust. However, sometimes your brain just forgets to put your hand there. You know, sometimes the floor is slick. Sometimes it's colder than you thought. You're sleepier than you thought. A really cute dog runs across the room at the same time as you're trying to do something, and your brain goes, ooh, shiny thing, right? Like, injuries are going to happen, but we can make them less impactful. We can make them easier to recover from. We can ideally make them maybe smaller. You know, we can't control everything in our lives, but we can support what we want to do.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, maybe you can control everything, right?
No. No, I can't. That would be, I don't think I'd want to. Yeah, but it's like,
I don't want that responsibility.
Like in car inspection, I guess. Like, even if nothing's wrong, you want to go in and check it out every so often, right?
Right.
And
yeah,
maybe...
and that's my ideal world. And I know it's not necessarily possible for everyone for a multitude of reasons, but yeah, I'd say also catching things earlier than later. If you realize you're starting to eliminate skills that you don't train anymore, you're like, oh, I'm not really injured. I just can't do this skill. I can't do a flamenco grip anymore, or twisted grip anymore. Like, well, but you could do it before. What changed? Instead of eliminating something and then seeing your world shrink, and then you're like, oh my God, I can't train anymore. And that's when you go get help. It's going to be an easier and faster progression if you're like, I don't really love doing twisted grip. How do I fix that? Or my hamstring doesn't really want to let me do my front split anymore.
Yeah. I think this is a place where, I know we mentioned journaling already, but journaling can be really helpful. Like, every time I go to practice pole, I write down what I did and also just like generally how I'm feeling. And I sort of aim for like about a third of my practice time should feel great. About a third should be like, it happened. About a third should be like, I'm frustrated. But like if the I'm frustrated is like showing up a lot, that's something's up. And I would definitely, talk to a PT, talk to a coach. If you're just sort of like doing random stuff off the internet, maybe work with someone who can help you build a more structured curriculum so that you're making the goals you're looking for, and help you assess like, hey, is this trick right for me? Should I be working at this given my command of the movement parts that make it up? So yeah,
I'm always like, you're more frustrated than not. First check in, am I sleeping? Right? Like, am I sleeping? Am I eating? Like, am I sleeping? Am I eating? Did I change my training schedule? Or, I've had a few people in the last couple of weeks, like Halloween shows, crisis in the Middle East, lots of things going on. Like, whatever it is, their stress levels have increased, right? And they haven't changed their training load, but they're like, oh my God, my hip hurts. Oh my God, my this hurts. And it's like, okay, let's talk about how your load has increased, whether or not your actual hours in the studio have increased. So there's things, do you have a family member who's sick? Is your pet ill? Like, all of those things, look into all of that. One of the things I actually have, and I can get you guys a link to it, is I have it's paper. Maybe someday I'll get it together, create a digital version, but I have a training log thing that asks those questions. Like, it's like, on a scale of 0 to 10, how tired are you? On a scale of 0 to 10, how sore are you? What tricks did you train today? How did you feel afterwards? So it's just like a quick check-in for yourself kind of thing. I can make sure you have a link.
Yeah. I'll definitely put that in the show notes. And folks in my conditioning club, you also know I give you a journal, and you can print it out or not as you please, but just like track what you're doing, track how you're feeling. And even on days you're not training, right? Like, are you consistently not doing well on your rest days? That's another thing that I'm like, something's up. something needs to change in what you're doing with your life and your circus. Or pole. Wow. Absolutely. So I want to make sure we don't go over, because I know you are very busy, but I do have here in my notes Circus Smart written down. What is Circus Smart?
Well, Circus Smart is just kind of the way I like to think about the world. So Circus Smart is taking the knowledge that's out in there and applying it to your training. And I'm like, oh wait, am I? Yeah. Hey.
For those of you just listening, I'm gonna sit up, and the shirt says "Train Circus Smart."
Right. So it's kind of my overarching mission is to make sure that we're training in a really mindful way. whatever that means at the level you're at, and the investment into that knowledge that you feel like you want to dive in. Not everyone wants to read the research. Not everyone wants to listen to us babble on about the research. But there are those of us out here doing it so that hopefully some of it trickles down to every single person who's practicing, so that every single person doesn't have to do it, because that's not what we're all into, right? Like, it's just not. We don't all have to have the same interest. Even though we all love pole, even though we all love circus, we don't have to approach it the same way. But if we can continue to change and move the conversation forward, we all do it with more intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. Build that, it's not really an institution, but build the knowledge and the norms in the field around, what evidence we have, and drawing together everyone's wisdom and knowing to help folks feel
yeah and again, like evidence, I'm putting evidence, because again, those of you who are listening, evidence is in air quotes, right? Because a lot of it is studio based, practical evidence of how bodies are actually working, right? We have been teaching circus a lot longer than we've been studying it, and our instructors are huge reservoirs of knowledge, and that shouldn't be discounted. And maybe we just change some of the word, like maybe the knowledge is absolutely right, and we change some of the vocabulary around how we talk about it. Or maybe we change the order of class to improve the way the brain works, like there are things here and there that are being added to by researchers, but also every single instructor and person who is having influence, for sure.
Speaking of people having influence, is there anything you'd like to plug? I know we already mentioned your book, Applied Anatomy of Aeronautical Arts. Right, there we go. Which, again, I recommend. I have a copy. I reference it constantly. If you care, I recommend. If you're not an anatomy nerd, don't buy something just because I told you to, and then be like, oh, it's just anatomy.
It's a nerdy anatomy book. It is definitely more textbook than like fun reading, but the pictures are super pretty. The illustrator was spectacular that I had the pleasure of working with. If you are an anatomy super nerd and you want to learn more, if you're looking,
whole relevant one. There we go. That is on A Climb from page 96.
Here we go. We got the little inversion.
Yeah,
thing,
absolutely.
Right? So, I just randomly opened to that too, so it's great. But if you are a huge anatomy nerd and you want to dive in a little bit deeper but don't have a big anatomy background, I do have a basic anatomy course. It does primarily, it's focused primarily on aerial, primarily circus sided of things, but it will teach you anatomy at least in a way that is more fun. It's kind of the companion course to the book. So if you are more of a visual audio type learner, that is available through my website as well. So that's Complete Aerial Anatomy. You can Google it. The circus stuff, Complete Aerial Anatomy. But that's probably a great place to start. If you are looking for a healthcare clinician in your neighborhood, again, you can head to my website and maybe we'll make sure that link is directly available. But I have a link to clinicians who have taken some of my continuing education courses so that you can find someone who speaks your language and understands a little bit about you and your body, hopefully in your community. If you know somebody who's not on that list, please either reach out for them or let them know that they can get their name added to that list so we can increase access to pole-specific care for everyone.
Absolutely, some good things to do, and I'll put the links to that in the show notes as well. So, and like I said, I know you're busy. I won't respect your time. It's been a great conversation. I could definitely keep chatting, but we should probably wrap it up. We
can always do it again.
Absolutely, part 2. I'm definitely down. So any last words you want to leave pole dancers with to take with them out into the world?
I think I love the themes that we kind of ended up circling around today, that, each individual is a researcher in their own body. I want to empower you to own that and to really have that experiential journey with this amazing tool that you have. And I also encourage you to to seek care when your body doesn't feel right. If you are that researcher in your body, you're going to be much more observant when things don't feel good. And I want to keep you guys polling for a long, long time. So anything we can do to increase access and increase your longevity is going to be huge. So go out there and train smart.
Great words of wisdom, and what Emily said. All right, thanks so much for joining today. Thanks so much to everyone for listening. I hope you found this as enjoyable, informative as I did. I'm sure you did. And I will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for joining today, pole dancer. This podcast is a production of Slink Through Strength, the inclusive, evidence-based online pole studio. So if you're looking for a place to train, either off-pole conditioning and flexibility, or learning pole tricks and refining your pole movement, you can find us online at slinkthroughstrength.com.